Welcome to the Fatherhood Fitness Podcast. I'm your host, Anthony Pluff. Each week, we will cover various topics that dads struggle with in their fitness journey. I'll give you actionable steps that you can apply right away, not only to take back control of your own health, but so you're able to be a better example for your kids too. All right, welcome in. Hope you're having a great week. I don't know how many of you watch the show The View. I do not. But recently, Oprah was on the show, and there's a clip that's been circulating around, pretty virally now. Virally, I think I made it before. It's been going viral. But the clip, I'm gonna pull it up here on my phone real quick. So I apologize if you can hear in the background. But she said that you don't overeat and become obese. Obesity causes you to overeat, and so that was regarding Ozempic. And so she's been pretty outspoken about Ozempic, about weight loss and things like that. And so there's kind of a lot to unpack there. And there's two sides of this. There's one side where it says that, DNA, she was talking about the obesity gene. And so then there's this whole argument on whether or not there's an obesity gene. Are some people more likely to become obese? And then there's the other side that talks about where it's just willpower. You're making the choice. And so I'm on now. I had one of my favorite teachers. I had a very good teacher in middle school. She would always tell us not to sit on the fence, always pick a side. And unfortunately, as Dr. Aaron Horschick and Stuart McGill would always say, it depends. And so in a lot of times in these situations, there isn't it's not clearly black and white. A lot of times it is very gray, and sometimes we'll get some more information, we'll shift to the other side, and then we'll receive some more information. Maybe a new study will come out, and then we kind of shift back. And I think I don't want to say I want to tread lightly on this because I definitely do know, I've been coaching for 10 years, more than a decade now. And so I've had a wide range of clients from all sorts of backgrounds. And I've also been in education for even longer than that. And so I've worked with students, and I've taught, physical education. I've taught health classes, and I have a very diverse background when it comes to this. And so I see lots of different things. And I think both things can be very true. It can be a lack of willpower, and there also can be a genetic component to this. Now, there's the nature versus nurture argument. Like, if any of you guys, I'm sure if you're listening to this podcast, the majority of you have at least one kid, probably more. I've got 3. We've got 1 on the way. And so, as you know, like, none of your kids are exactly the same, right? What works with one kid doesn't necessarily work for the other. If you have siblings, you know that, you grew up in a household with the same parents, and you're very different individuals. I'm very different than my older sister. My younger sister is a mix between me and my other sister. And so it's like, it's very different. There's lots of factors that come in. And so I think when it comes to weight loss, we want to see it as calories in, calories out. And at the end of the day, that is what it's broken down to. But there are many things that make it difficult for that equation to balance out, right? And one of those being, it can be a genetic factor. And I think that for whatever reason, it's become a hot topic where people just don't have enough willpower. And can that be true? Absolutely, right? Willpower or discipline, whatever you want to call it, is a factor, but there are still things that make it more difficult for some people to have willpower. You may have multiple kids, and one of your kids suffers with staying focused. Maybe they have ADD, maybe they have ADHD, and one of your other one of your other kids does not. And you can see firsthand how differently they learn. And if you try and do the same exact thing with both of them, you're going to get wildly different outcomes, and that's going to be very difficult. And so for me as a coach, I get to see that. I get to see how I can teach somebody one thing and they apply it right away. And I teach somebody the exact same thing and they struggle a little bit. And so we either have to, reteach it or teach it in a different way that clicks with them. That's the same thing, with our kids, right? My son is very, very similar to my wife, where we can just tell him something, we can show him something. He may ask some questions, then he says okay, and he goes and applies it. And that is a very unique characteristic. My wife is the same way there, where things just click. For me, things don't always click that way. I'm very hands-on. I'm visual. I need to be able to see it. I remember when I was in college, classes like chemistry were more difficult for me because I couldn't see it. It was hard for me to wrap my mind around it. But things like physics, that was easier. I could see the cause and effect of it, and it made more sense to me. And just different learning skills, right? And I think your environment, it plays a huge role in this. If there is a genetic component, but there's also an environment, the environment you grow up in, what you see modeled for you also matters too, right? My kids are very active. They eat a lot of nutritious foods, but my wife and I are both very active, and those are the foods that we give them. And so you could see people, you could see kids, you could see adults who aren't necessarily as active. They struggle with certain things, but maybe that's what was modeled for them. And so at some point, yes, the responsibility is on you. And so that's where what comes in as the nature versus nurture. But it's not that simple, right? It's not nature versus nurture. It's nature and nurture, right? We can have a genetic component and then be put in a great environment, but we can have two different people, two different biologies, two different DNAs put in the same exact environment, and they can handle it differently. And so to say that there's no genetic component at all can be very disingenuous. To say it's all genetics is also very disingenuous, because what we know as humans, as people, is that we can learn things. Yes, it can be harder for people. For me, reading is a skill that is very difficult. I love reading. I love audible books. I love reading physical books, but I'm not a fast reader at all. And it takes me a very long time to get through a book. My wife can fly through a book, and she's a very fast reader. And so they're just very different skills, right? Doesn't make one right or wrong. That just the way we learn, the way we process information is very different. And so we have different learning styles. We have different ways, we communicate. And then to say like there's zero genetic component when it comes to weight loss, when it comes to how fast your metabolism is and all these things, that's not genuine at all. That's not realistic to think, there's a genetic component to so many things in our life. And then for weight loss though, it's all about willpower. And that's just not the case at all. And if we're not careful, then we can maybe we don't have enough empathy. If weight isn't something you struggle with, then you can maybe be less than empathetic towards somebody who is struggling with their weight. But there's a good chance there's an area of your life you struggle with too. And it's sometimes there are genetic factors that play into things. Think of like alcohol, right? We don't deny that alcohol or nicotine or things like that, there's a genetic component there. But when it comes to food, we're like, oh, we're all the same. No, that doesn't make sense, right? And so I think sometimes when we think about this, we have to understand that there's more to the story, but we don't want to also just put ourselves in a box, because maybe for you, maybe it is a struggle to lose weight, right? But telling yourself, it's all genetic, telling yourself, there's nothing you can do, that's also not going to be helpful for you, because there are people who, have struggled with their weight much more than you have. There are people who have, had it much worse off than you have, who are having success right now. So just because it may be more difficult for you doesn't mean it's not possible. For me, if I compare myself to my wife and we read a book, it may take her a week to read a book. It may take me 3 months to get through the same book, because I'll read 4 or 5 pages. I get distracted. I try and do something else. I can't sit and focus that long, but she can. If I'm comparing myself to her, yeah, I'm going to get frustrated, right? And I could say, hey, I'm just a slow reader, and then not read at all, but that's not helpful for me, right? It may, I think that's something, a trap that we got to also be very careful not to fall into as well, is that we're not just using these as excuses. Yes, if I found out today I had a learning disability, I'm not sure that would help me. It would give me a reason, why something is happening, but it doesn't necessarily help me move forward. It can help me understand what's going on, but I still have to do something about it. If my goal is to still read a book in a month or something, I still got to put in the work. Is it going to be harder? Am I going to be frustrated? Yes. But you still have to put in the work. And so maybe for you, maybe there is a genetic component to it. Maybe you struggle more with, certain, cravings for food, or there's certain things that, it makes it harder for you to feel full when you're eating. And so you keep eating and eating and eating. And so maybe that's something you struggle with. And whether that's a genetic component or not, that's your reality. That's what's going on. But it's not helpful to not do anything about it, right? You still have to do things. Yes, if the goal is the goal, then it takes what it takes, right? If you want to, if you have a goal, maybe maybe you want to run a half marathon, and right now, you haven't ran in years and stuff. If the goal is the goal, then we got to put in the work to get better. We can't just, wait for, the circumstances. We can't just say, oh, well, if we want to get there, then we have to take what we have. If you want to go to college, you want to go back and finish your degree, and you've got 3 kids, you're working a full-time job, and you're the sole income provider for your family, it's probably not going to take you the same amount of time compared to an 18-year-old kid who has no responsibilities, who's just starting their freshman year. You may only be able to take 1 or 2 courses. It may take you 8 years to graduate with your degree, but if it's something you want to do, you're going to get there. And so I think a lot of times, at least what I've seen with the argument of whether or not there's a genetic component or not, people can use it as an excuse. And I don't want you to use it as an excuse. It can be a reason. And sometimes with the more information, the clearer the picture, it makes it easier to move forward, because now we know what we're dealing with, right? If we know that you're driving, you're going on a trip, you're driving 4 hours, and there's construction, there's all this stuff, and that ahead of time, it makes the journey a little bit more bearable, because it's not going to be as smooth as you'd like. If you have a genetic component that makes it harder for you, to say no to food, where you're thinking about food all the time, then now what that gives you information that helps you prepare for the journey ahead. And so I don't think it's so black and white. Yes, acquiring more willpower, more discipline can be helpful, right? But it doesn't mean it's not going to be harder for you. And so I think there's so much gray to this. I think sometimes, we want it to be so black and white. Is it genetic? Is it not? Yes and no. Is it willpower? Is it not? Yes and no. And there's not always a clear-cut answer. But I think with a little bit more empathy, more understanding, more information, then you can understand your situation and then move forward accordingly.
That concludes this episode of the Fatherhood Fitness Podcast. Thank you for those of you who took time out of your busy schedules to listen. If you have any questions or comments or an idea for a topic for a future episode, please feel free to reach out, and I'd love to hear from you.